They chuckled as the old man wheeled himself in, just another forgotten grandpa in a retirement home. His hands trembled slightly, his head tilted low. Some whispered, others rolled their eyes. Probably doesn't even know where he is, someone muttered. He parked quietly in the back corner, alone, invisible. The room buzzed with light chatter and awkward smiles. It was supposed to be a cheerful gathering. The younger staff offered polite glances, then moved on. No one noticed how steady his eyes actually were, or how they scanned the exits like he'd done it 100 times before. Outside, a black SUV rolled to a stop. Men in sharp suits stepped out, not smiling. One adjusted his earpiece. Another spoke quietly into his sleeve. Suddenly, trained eyes were sweeping every corner of the room. The mood shifted, but no one knew why yet. And then, the doors opened. Silence fell. Gasps broke the air as the President of the United States walked in, not to greet the crowd, but to stand beside the old man in the wheelchair. Because he wasn't just some grandpa. He was about to speak, and when he did, everything changed. Welcome to Silent Salute. Before we continue with this incredible story that will restore your faith in recognizing true heroes, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today, and if you think stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and your support means everything to us. The Sunset Manor retirement community sat on a quiet hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean, its white walls and red tile roof designed to feel more like a resort than a place where people came to finish their final chapters. The afternoon sun streamed through floor to ceiling, windows casting long shadows across the common room where folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows for what the staff called their monthly Veterans Appreciation Gathering. It was October 15th, and the autumn light painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Most residents attended these gatherings reluctantly, more out of routine than genuine interest. They'd heard the same stories countless times, seen the same faded photographs passed around the same circle, watched the same documentary clips about wars that felt increasingly distant from their current reality. The staff tried their best to make these events meaningful, but enthusiasm was hard to generate when most participants struggled to remember what they'd eaten for breakfast. Director Sarah Martinez had organized this particular gathering with extra care because they were expecting several new residents' families to attend. She wanted to showcase the community's commitment to honoring military service, even though privately she wondered if these events did more harm than good. The veterans who could still speak coherently often repeated the same stories, while those who couldn't communicate clearly sat silently staring at walls or windows, lost in memories no one else could access. The wheelchairs were arranged in a semicircle facing a small stage where Martinez planned to give a brief presentation about the facility's veteran programs. Behind her, a banner read, "Honoring Our Heroes." With small American flags taped along the edges, it was well-intentioned, but felt more like decoration than genuine tribute, the kind of gesture that looks good in brochures but doesn't quite capture the weight of actual service and sacrifice. As residents were wheeled in by staff members or shuffled in with walkers, the room filled with the familiar sounds of institutional care, the squeak of wheelchair wheels, the rustle of blankets being adjusted, the quiet conversations between family members who visited out of duty rather than genuine connection. It was a scene repeated in hundreds of similar facilities across the country where aging veterans spent their final years largely forgotten by the nation they'd once served. In the back corner, almost hidden behind a potted plant, sat Harold Whitmore. Though nobody in the room knew his name, he'd been a resident for only 3 weeks, transferred from a VA hospital after a stroke had left him with limited mobility and even more limited speech. The staff had been told he was a Navy veteran, but the paperwork was sparse and he'd never volunteered any information about his service. His family visited occasionally, but they seemed uncomfortable with his condition, and their visits were brief and awkward. Harold's appearance did nothing to command respect or attention. He was thin, almost frail, with wispy white hair and hands that shook slightly from the aftereffects of his stroke. His clothes were the standard-issue retirement home casual, a cardigan sweater over a button-down shirt with pants that were a size too big for his diminished frame. His eyes were often unfocused, and he spoke so rarely that some staff members wondered if he'd lost the ability entirely. The other residents largely ignored him during meals. He sat alone at a table near the kitchen, picking at his food without complaint. During activity time, he'd sit in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the ocean with an expression that suggested he was seeing something far beyond the horizon. The staff had tried to engage him in conversation, but his responses were limited to nods or shakes of his head, occasionally a word or two spoken so quietly they were barely audible. As the Veterans Appreciation event began, Martinez took the microphone and delivered her prepared remarks about sacrifice and service. Her words were sincere but generic, the kind of speech that could have been given at any similar facility in any city across America, she spoke about the greatest generation and their contributions to freedom, while the actual veterans in the audience sat passively, some sleeping, others staring blankly ahead. The program continued with a slideshow of historical photographs depicting various military campaigns and battles. The images flickered across a small screen showing young men in uniform boarding ships, storming beaches, standing victorious in foreign lands. The contrast between those vibrant black and white photographs and the elderly men slumped in wheelchairs was stark and somehow heartbreaking. During the presentation, some of the staff members began to whisper among themselves about their various residents. Tom Morrison had served in Korea and still talked about it constantly when he could be understood. Betty Schneider's husband had been a pilot in World War II before his death 5 years earlier. Robert Shin had been a Marine but rarely spoke about his experiences. The whispers weren't malicious, just the kind of casual conversation that happens when people think they're being discreet. But the whispers grew less kind when attention turned to Harold Whitmore in his corner. One nursing assistant pointed him out to another. "Look at poor Harold," she said quietly. "I don't think he even knows where he is anymore." Another staff member nodded sadly and replied, "It's so sad when they get like that, just sitting there day after day." The comments weren't meant to be cruel, but they carried the casual dismissal that often accompanies institutional care when staff members begin to see residents as conditions rather than people. A few family members who'd come to visit their own relatives also began to notice Harold. One woman leaned over to her husband and whispered, "That man over there looks like he's not even present. Someone should probably take him back to his room. He's not getting anything out of this." Her husband glanced over and shrugged, responding, "Maybe he just likes being around people even if he can't participate." The program dragged on with more photographs, more generic comments about service and sacrifice. Martinez had planned to conclude with a moment of silence followed by refreshments and informal socializing. It was meant to be respectful and appropriate, but it felt more like going through the motions than genuine honor or recognition. The veterans in attendance had heard it all before, and their responses ranged from polite attention to obvious boredom. As Martinez began her closing remarks about remembering those who served, Harold Whitmore shifted slightly in his wheelchair for the first time during the entire presentation. His head lifted just a degree or two, and his eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the window. It was such a subtle movement that most people didn't notice, but those who did assumed he was simply adjusting his position or perhaps responding to some internal discomfort. Outside the building, completely unnoticed by anyone inside, a convoy of black vehicles had pulled into the parking lot with the kind of precision that suggests careful planning and coordination. The vehicles were unremarkable to casual observers, but trained eyes would have recognized the telltale signs of government transportation: bulletproof glass, reinforced doors, and the subtle antenna arrays that indicated sophisticated communication equipment. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, moving with the efficient choreography of a well-rehearsed security detail. They wore earpieces, and their eyes constantly scanned the surrounding area, looking for potential threats or unusual activity. Their presence would have been obvious to anyone with security training, but to the casual observer they might have been mistaken for funeral directors or insurance investigators. The lead agent spoke quietly into his microphone, confirming their arrival and receiving instructions from someone at a remote location. The conversation was brief and professional, using codes and abbreviations that would have been meaningless to unauthorized listeners. Within minutes, they had established a secure perimeter around the building while maintaining enough distance to avoid drawing attention from the residents or staff inside. Back in the common room, Martinez was wrapping up her presentation when something extraordinary happened. Harold Whitmore began to speak. His voice was quiet at first, barely audible above the ambient noise of the room, but it grew stronger as he continued. What he said made no immediate sense to the people around him, but the words came out with surprising clarity and precision. "I solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic," he said, his voice carrying across the room with unexpected strength. The conversation stopped. People turned to look at him with confusion mixed with curiosity. Someone wondered aloud if he was having some kind of episode or if they should call for medical assistance. But Harold continued undeterred. "That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God." The words flowed from him with the precision of someone who had memorized them decades ago and never forgotten their significance. The room fell completely silent. Everyone was staring at Harold, now trying to process what they were hearing. The staff members exchanged confused glances, unsure whether this was a medical emergency or something else entirely. Martinez reached for her radio to call for assistance, but something in Harold's demeanor made her hesitate. He wasn't showing signs of distress or confusion. Instead, he appeared more alert and focused than anyone had seen him since his arrival. As Harold finished reciting what some recognized as a military oath, the main doors to the common room opened with an authority that commanded immediate attention. A man in a perfectly pressed suit walked in, followed by several others who were clearly part of his security detail. But this wasn't just any government official. The moment he entered the room, there was an unmistakable sense of power and importance that comes with the highest levels of leadership. Martinez recognized him immediately, her face going pale as she realized that the President of the United States had just walked into her retirement home. No advance notice, no formal arrangements, no media presence, just the leader of the free world walking purposefully across the room toward Harold Whitmore. The security detail spread out efficiently, creating a protective perimeter while trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible. The president moved with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention in any room he entered, but his focus was entirely on Harold Whitmore. He walked past the other residents, past the staff members, past the confused family members, straight to the wheelchair in the back corner where the old man sat, now looking more alert than he had in weeks. Without ceremony, without speeches, without any of the pomp that usually accompanies presidential appearances, the President of the United States knelt down beside Harold's wheelchair. His movement was respectful, almost reverent, as he positioned himself at eye level with the elderly veteran. The Secret Service agents maintained their vigilant watch, but gave their protectee enough space for what was clearly intended to be a private moment. The president spoke quietly, his words meant only for Harold, but in the absolute silence of the room, everyone could hear what he said. "Thank you for everything," he said simply, his voice carrying genuine emotion and respect. "Your country remembers your service mattered. Your sacrifice was not forgotten." Harold's eyes filled with tears as he nodded slowly, his trembling hand moving to return a salute that was shaky but unmistakably military in its precision. For several minutes, the two men remained in that position, the most powerful person in the world and a forgotten veteran sharing a moment of recognition that transcended politics, protocol, and ceremony. Around them, the room remained frozen in time as witnesses to something extraordinary and unexpected. No one spoke, no one moved. Everyone seemed to understand that they were seeing something rare and precious. The president stood slowly, his own eyes showing the emotion of the moment. He placed a gentle hand on Harold's shoulder and said quietly, "You shaped this nation's history, you and men like you made everything else possible." Then he stepped back, gave a formal military salute, and turned to address the room. His voice was strong and clear as he spoke to the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of one of the finest warriors this nation has ever produced." Harold Whitmore served with distinction in operations that remain classified to this day. His courage, his sacrifice, his dedication to duty helped secure the freedoms we all enjoy today. The president paused, scanning the faces in the room before continuing, "I came here today not for cameras or politics, but because some debts can never be fully repaid, only acknowledged." The transformation in the room was immediate and profound. The same people who had been whispering about poor Harold sitting in his corner now looked at him with awe and respect. The staff members who had dismissed him as another confused elderly resident now saw a war hero whose service had shaped the very nation they called home. The family members who had pitied his condition now understood they were witnessing a moment of historical significance. As the president prepared to leave, he turned back to Harold one final time. "Your oath still stands," he said quietly. "Your service still counts. Your sacrifice still matters." Harold's response was barely audible but unmistakably clear. "Hurrah, Mr. President," he whispered, using the Navy SEAL battle cry that identified him as a member of the most elite fighting force in the world. The president nodded with understanding and respect, then walked toward the exit with his security detail following in formation. The entire visit had lasted less than 15 minutes, but it had changed everything about how everyone in that room understood honor, service, and the true meaning of heroism. As the black SUVs pulled away from the parking lot, the common room remained silent except for the sound of Harold Whitmore quietly weeping tears of gratitude and recognition. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at Sunset Manor spread quickly through the veteran community and beyond. Harold Whitmore was revealed to have been a Navy SEAL who had participated in some of the most dangerous and classified operations of his era. His service record, when finally declassified, showed a man who had risked everything repeatedly for his country and his fellow servicemen. The stroke that had limited his speech and mobility couldn't diminish the significance of what he had accomplished. The staff at Sunset Manor began to see all their residents differently, wondering what stories lay hidden behind failing memories and failing bodies. They started asking better questions, listening more carefully, treating each veteran with the respect due to someone who had once stood between their nation and its enemies. The Veterans Appreciation Gatherings became genuine celebrations of service rather than obligatory events to be endured. Harold himself seemed to find new life after that day. His speech improved gradually, and he began sharing stories of his service with anyone willing to listen. The other residents treated him with newfound respect, and the staff made sure he received the honor and attention he deserved. The corner where he'd once sat forgotten became a place of reverence where people came to hear first-hand accounts of courage and sacrifice. But perhaps the most important change was in how people understood the connection between past and present. Harold Whitmore's story became a reminder that heroes don't always look like what we expect them to look like. Sometimes they're sitting quietly in wheelchairs, wearing cardigans and staring out windows. Sometimes they're the people we overlook, dismiss, or pity without understanding the depth of their contributions to our freedom and security. The president's visit had been arranged through channels that few people understood, but many suspected it was the result of someone in the intelligence community recognizing Harold's name on a routine report and realizing that one of America's most decorated warriors was spending his final years in anonymity. The visit was never publicized, never used for political purposes, simply acknowledged as the right thing to do for a man who had given everything for his country. Sometimes the most profound moments happen without cameras or crowds, without speeches or ceremonies. Sometimes they happen in retirement home common rooms where forgotten heroes sit quietly carrying the weight of classified missions and unspoken sacrifices. Sometimes recognition comes not from the world at large, but from the one person whose opinion matters most, the commander-in-chief, acknowledging that some debts transcend politics and protocol. Harold Whitmore had spent his adult life serving in shadows, completing missions that would never be publicly acknowledged, protecting secrets that could never be shared. But in that moment, when the president knelt beside his wheelchair and whispered his thanks, Harold finally received the recognition he had never sought but always deserved. The laughter had stopped, the whispers had ceased, and the silence that followed was filled with the kind of respect that can only come from true understanding of what sacrifice means. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.